Now, the big story of our discussion is the COP27, the outcome of COP27. I know Amos was there, Elmawi was also there. Elmawi, we'll just begin with you. You can tell us, according to you, uh, was this a successful COP? Because much of the things that were spoken in COP27 last month is what we had in Glasgow, save for a few things which of course we'll be talking about later. But you can tell us, was it a success or just another COP?
Um, I'm a bit divided because two things happened. One, we were able to get loss and damage for the first time to get it discussed, and for countries to unanimously agree to have loss and damage is a key aspect that we have to work on, and that the finances have to be provided. So that was key and important. But I think what we lost was we were clear that we wanted to really win on a conversation around phasing out of fossil fuels. I think they call this COP as the implementation COP or the action COP. And while we were happy when going there, we thought things are going to be implemented. They might have still meant they're implementing something, but I think what they meant implementation for was implementing fossil fuels because they've refused to agree to phase out fossil fuels. We had the fossil fuel interest represented by the biggest number of people, the delegates who went. I think more than 600 people were from the fossil fuel industry. I didn't see much happening around Africa despite having a lot of delegates representing us. Kenya, for instance, had over 380 people representing the country, which made it as number 4 globally and the second most represented country within Africa, just after DRC. So I didn't see much of a push around the issues, and I even struggled seeing the 380 something people there. So I assumed maybe a few were actually there for the COP, and maybe others were there for holidays and for tourism and what else, shopping and whatnot. And therefore, for me, these conversations, and Daktari has actually mentioned the way they're being done in secrecy, because during the COP meetings, there are several things that are happening. We're having the civil society organizations that are going, that are acting as they're observing, but being an observant, it means you have to get access to all the different areas. You cannot necessarily contribute or make your voice heard, but at least all of these areas should be made accessible to you. But much of the important discussions, especially those within governments and the negotiations, are being done in a very secretive manner. If I was to borrow my brother's analogy of a conclave, I think it's even more than that, because no one is allowing you to be inside there. No one knows what's happening. I was even told at some point the presidency was not even sharing some of this information with some of the government representatives. I was told when they're working on the final narrative around the issues, the government representatives, they could not receive the documentation. They had to go to the presidency, and someone opens a laptop and you read and you leave it there. So you just leave with the information, but not necessarily with it itself. So it was quite a secretive sort of discussion that was happening. We were not able to really push and make sure that we deal with the fossil fuel phasing out that's supposed to happen. And it makes me even worried, because next year this is going to be happening in Dubai, in the United Arab Emirates. And what it actually means is now the two presidency will be for Egypt and Dubai. And therefore, I mean, I'm super worried about how that will look like, because the interest around fossil fuels within these countries is significant. And in my mind, you don't put a meeting where there is conflict. I mean, if I am to do something, or if I'm to find my daughter a husband, I wouldn't necessarily be looking for the criminals out of them, or people who have some tricky background. And therefore, if you are trying to have a conversation around phasing out of fossil fuels, the place to do it won't be where fossil fuels is the main driver of the economy and revenue around these areas.
When you talk about loss and damage being adopted this time around as a point of whatever reference, or the part of the talk which was ongoing, To many, it feels like it was a good thing or it was a plus now that it has been adopted or spoken about. And some agreements were made. But when you look at the agreement which was made, it's not clear which countries or who are going to benefit from this and who is funding this. The commitment is lacking. And again, you remember the $100 billion again issue is still hanging. If they have not yet honored the $100 billion for the last 10 years, do you think this time around they're going to adopt their loss and damage and do something about it?
So I agree with you. It's good that finally they've acknowledged that there's loss and damage that's happening, and we need to provide a facility to be able to deal with that. But that doesn't get anywhere in terms of us getting to resolve the problem that we're in. A big part of the problem, why we're seeing loss and damage was a big issue, is because governments did not, they thought by agreeing to loss and damage, they will actually be confessing to liability, and they were worried about the can of worm that will be opening if they sort of in some ways agreed that they've caused the climate crisis that we're in today. Because with loss and damage, and what's happening is that the global north have contributed the most to the climate crisis that we're in today, the historical carbon emissions, carbon dioxide emissions. And then the global south, especially within Africa, have contributed very little to the problems that you're in today, but they're one of the most affected, most vulnerable areas because of they're not able to really be resilient, they're not able to adapt and mitigate, and also because we are poor, so we cannot necessarily be able to put in some of the measures to be able to cope with some of these processes, and therefore, celebrating at this juncture will in many ways it won't be the wisest thing to do, because what we have is just a promise. It's just an agreement that we need to provide something for loss and damage. We still need to know how much money is going to be provided. We need to know who's going to be providing it. And one of my biggest problems I've had with especially the United Nations Framework Convention or climate change conventions is the fact that these agreements are also not binding. I mean, countries can commit, they can make promises, but they can always get out of them. They can always not deliver, and there's really nothing that you can do about it. I think it's high time that us, as communities that are affected the most by some of these climate impacts, we have to find ways of pushing back and making sure that they know if you make a promise, if you make a commitment, then we actually going to make sure that you actually make good on your promise. This could take different ways. I mean, if we have to litigate against some of these promises, if we have to name and shame, I think all of these are options that we can have. And then finally is also another group of people that we really don't speak about as often as we should, because the biggest cause of the climate crisis is carbon emissions, and much of it is coming from fossil fuels. And the biggest people who are pushing on fossil fuels are actually companies and corporates. And these are people who've benefited a lot from the same. I think it's high time now that we tax them and make sure that they pay all of these damages that they've done from before. And in all these resources providing them, we shouldn't continue with the current modus operandi where we are giving it to communities, we're giving it to countries as loans, but we need to give it as financing. We need to youth in the best manner, shape, and form in terms of what will actually be the best thing to provide for them for climate impacts within the countries. It shouldn't be about countries using it as a way of pushing their own interest, as a way of pushing whatever they want to see within these countries, where they're saying, we are financing this and that, well, necessarily they should be giving unconditional grants for us to be able to really push ahead. And then finally is the aspect around who benefits. Because currently I'm told there's a debate around what they call the vulnerable countries, climate vulnerable countries. And when I was at COP27, I was shocked to learn that Pakistan is not considered as one of the vulnerable countries, when actually just this year, more than a third of the country was underwater because of the floods that are happening. I mean, then what is the definition of a vulnerable country? We need to make sure that we're looking at it in an equitable manner. We need to make sure that these resources are provided within different areas in an equitable manner. And we also need ways to make sure that we follow up and enforce some of these promises that are being made. Otherwise, we'll keep doing things the same way and expecting a different result. And that's the true definition of insanity.
Well done, well explained. Actually, Amos, now you were on the ground.
Yes.
And did we succeed? Because this COP was labeled as the African COP and, of course, implementation COP. But people felt that being now that it is happening in Africa, and more so on the part of loss and damage, and more so on the issue of the $100 billion, which has been an issue for the last 10 years, many felt that this time around things will change.
Yeah.
We saw big promises from the likes of US President and others. Now, did we succeed this time around?
What I would say is that what happened in Sharm El-Sheikh, I would tell it was a tale of two COPs in Sharm El-Sheikh. Two COPs because, for once, vulnerable countries for over 30 years of these discussions have been calling for a facility that can help them rebuild their lives and livelihoods after disasters. And for once, governments, countries agreed to have a vessel in the name of Loss and Damage Fund. Even though we do not have the money yet, even though they have not finalized on various key elements, but I think just having that vehicle where we can now start thinking of having a facility that can enable communities that have been have lost and have been damaged by climate-related disasters, I think is very important. And for once, this sends a message to the polluters that in the end, they'll have to pay for the pollution. I hope that as we try to find a way of financing the facility or funding the facility, finding resources for the fund, we are going to tax the polluter. That we can have a carbon tax. That those who have got us into this mess are made to pay. Historical polluters have to pay. They have a responsibility. They owe vulnerable countries a climate debt. And I think I'm happy that these discussions have started and we have a fund established and that can help.
But almost my feeling, sorry, is that this you mentioned about this the vehicle which has been created per se, which you're talking about. But I have an issue because now this is a second vehicle in 10 years because the $100 billion funding which was supposed to be given out has remained just a promise. Like Elmawi mentioned about legal binding framework lacks in the whole of this discussion. Now this is another vehicle which we are now beginning again. Now do you think it's just going to be an empty vehicle because there's another one we've been pulling for the last 10 years, there's nothing to smile about, and now we began another vehicle again, manufacturing another vehicle called Loss and Damage? Do you think it's going to be different?
Yeah, it's true that in 2009 historical polluters came up, they themselves, and said, okay, we are going to be giving 100 billion every year by 2020 to be able to help with dealing with the climate change. They haven't honored that. There are discussions already around adaptation.
Yes.
The fund, the 100 billion. You see, within the 100 billion, majority of the money was going to go into mitigation. And there are discussions that communities are already facing a lot of impacts. Communities are living with disasters every day. They need to be helped to be resilient to these disasters. So there are discussions that, because previously only 25% was going into adaptation. So they need to double that so that a half of the money goes into mitigation and a half of the money goes into adaptation. That is happening. We had to come out of this COP with a global goal on adaptation, clear plans on how we are going to approach adaptation. Now we were going into this COP. Actually, loss and damage was not in the agenda.
Yeah, sure.
So vulnerable countries had to, first of all, bargain to have loss and damage into the agenda. Actually, getting loss and damage on the agenda was a difficult thing. And these things have been happening for quite a long period. So that's why I say it's better to have this facility that we can now haggle around, we can negotiate, rather than having nothing.
Nothing, sure.
Yeah, that's why I say it was monumental for me as something that was achieved. And for it to happen in a COP that's taking place on a region that is being affected disproportionately by climate crisis, that is more vulnerable, for it to happen in Africa, I think this is something to celebrate. That an African COP has bore a loss and damage fund facility.
Okay.
I said there were two tales of COP27 in Sharm El-Sheikh. The second COP tale, the story about COP27 is that I had never imagined that in a health conference that would have tobacco lobbyists around trying to promote their products. In Sharm El-Sheikh, we had so many fossil fuel lobbyists. Even OPEC had a pavilion in the COP. We all know that we are in the climate crisis because of the fossil fuel energy regime. Fossil fuels have put our planet on fire. Having so many lobbyists, for me, it was a failure. But also, even though we had 80 countries agreeing on a text that will face down all fossil fuels. You see, in Glasgow last year, there was an agreement to face down unabated coal. This time round in Sharm El-Sheikh, India, led by India, you are saying, why discriminate? Why can't we have a text that speaks to all fossil fuels, that is coal, oil and gas? And this was agreed by 80 countries. But I think it's a shame that all the countries could not agree to have that in the final text. Because we know that if we were to deal with the issue of climate change, then we must begin by dealing with the issue of fossil fuels. For continents like Africa that have not contributed to the problem but are suffering the problem, I think the text around just energy transition and renewables, I think it's also something to celebrate because that came out in the final decision. But another thing is, for the first time, you see multinational development banks like the World Bank, like the Africa Development Banks, have been investing in fossil fuels. But for the first time also in Sharm El-Sheikh, we got a text countries calling on multinational development banks to reform their investment plans, to invest more in renewables. And for us to shift away from fossil fuels, we will need investments in renewables. So having a text that calls on World Banks, IMF, and Africa Development Banks to shift the investments to renewables was another success.
Wow.
So these are things that we are not looking at.
Okay.
We might not have got a text on phasing out coal, oil and gas, but we have got a text promoting renewables, which is very important. Africa has abundant renewable energy resources. 60% of the best solar resources are in Africa. 40% of all renewable energy resources are in Africa. So having a decision that promotes investment in these African resources is, I think, a win. And having that happen for the first time in Sharm El-Sheikh is a success. So that's why I say, even though we didn't win fully, there are wins to celebrate. We didn't lose it.
Wow. So it was a win-win. There's something to talk about after 2 weeks of discussions. Now, thank you. Elmawi has just left for another meeting. We appreciate your time with us, Elmawi. Of course, we'll be discussing this more and more. Now, back to studio. Now, Wanjuki, I was a bit concerned because you saw it. Some of the bigger corporates or big corporates who are funding, supporting, or of course offering financing for the COP27 are people who are polluters, like he's saying, and talking about now having a tax for polluters. I was a bit concerned. Would that maybe have twist the discussion? Because I'm giving you something because of something to get to talk about something, or I'm funding you for a course, and I'm the problem behind the scenes. Because many of them are the highest polluters, especially when you talk about plastic pollution, which is threatening our oceans. By 2050, they've told us we have more plastics in the ocean than fish. Now, don't you think that was maybe, could that maybe have twisted the way of discussion?
Thank you. And like for you guys who went to Sharm El-Sheikh, many of us who were left behind here thought that the Sharm El-Sheikh was actually a sham. And okay, maybe you got a better view because you are closer to the source. Huh?
Yes.
The truth is, if you want to ban payment of dowry, the last place you'd want to have that meeting is at your father-in-law's, because he may not support
the idea.
Yeah. So when COP27 happened in the Middle East, that area depends on oil, and everything about the economy is on oil.
Yes, yes.
Anything that goes against oil will never get any support. I'm even surprised because I didn't know the next COP would take place in
the
Dubai.
same region again.
An economy completely supported, 100% supported by oil.
Oil, yes.
They may be transitioning to transport and tourism, but take away oil, they are completely gone. Instead of going to Kisumu and telling people not to be doing fish, they may not support you. Can you now start doing doma and guache instead of fish? And so that conversation will not get the support you require. So actually, the location was wrong, the venue. And even I'm surprised that the next one is also around there. Because there is no way the economies around that area would support a ban on fossil fuels. The other part is that the sponsors of the events are heavy producers of single-use plastic, bottled drinks. And there's no way they will support anything that would affect their bottom line. And so I heard it from Anmari that the conference was paddocked. You couldn't go to the other side. And, so you actually were being controlled. Someone was controlling our listening, our actions. And so that's another negative from COP27. We did not hear those fiery speeches that came from Glasgow. Then coming to the financing, 2015, a COP that happened, I think, in France, Italy, is when we were promised money.
Yes.
If I promise you 100 shillings for every slap I slap you, you may enjoy the slap, but surely that's not the best way to get rich. And we are being told we'll be slapped with $100. We'll be slapped
100 billion.
and we'll be given 100 billion for the slap. 100 billion is very little money, by the way, when you consider the economy of Kenya, Africa.
Africa, yes.
And most of those resources actually coming from Africa, they go and modify them, process them, and then they bring us the $100 billion. How much have they taken out of our country by the time they give us $100 million? We should not even look at that money. In fact, I am against that kind of reparations. If my house is burning, it does not matter whether niko na deni yako. I should invite you to come with a bucket of water to put off the fire, to put out the fire. What is happening is we are being told, okay, your house can burn, but we'll give you some money. What value can you give? If you give us money today, what will our grandchildren think of us? We were actually bought into selling our future, because that's what's happening. I'm one person who's against even what they call adaptation and mitigation. Adaptation, no. We shouldn't adapt to climate change. We should resist climate change by actually reducing the methane gas that's going to the environment, by reducing the fossil fuels, not reducing, do away with them. We could in Africa produce enough firewood to fire the whole world. Our Sahara Desert, it's not a design. God didn't decide a desert in Africa. Actually, many people who have gone to the Sahara say they are tree stumps, there are lakes and even coral reefs within the savannah, or within the Sahara Desert. Meaning, in the creation of the world, the Sahara Desert was not a desert. We have encouraged the idea that Africa is poor because we can't do crops. We are now depending on food from outside the continent. Yet our country, every inch of our country can grow food throughout the year. We don't even require special conditions to grow. We don't require greenhouses. We just do grow cultivation. What is happening with our water? We empty our water from our rivers or into the ocean with the fertilizer or any good thing that is there, and we are ready to go back to Europe and buy fertilizer. How do we manage? My issue here is, what would you do with the $100 billion in Africa for a year, or even what we are given? It was 320 million that was promised to our president. What would you do it? Pump it into one of the funds and the circulating fund. Will it affect the climate? No. Money is not the issue. We should actually be addressing practical ways of absorbing carbon from the environment, not just for Kenya, but the whole of the world. Let there not be someone who says, okay, as long as I'm making money, I can pay Dan to keep quiet. That is never. That's, as an environmentalist, the money is not the issue. It is us changing the climate, preventing the climate going to 1.5 degrees. By the way, we have already exceeded the 1.5. We were promised there will be droughts in 2035. They happened in 2020 and 2021. So meaning even scientists cannot be able to predict the trend in the climate change. Who is going to pay? Of the $100 billion, who will be paid how much? What will it be used for? What technologies are we adapting? Most of the technologies that I heard being sold in Sharm El-Sheikh, the COP27, were, we'll supply solar panels to Africa. Why supply solar panels to Africa? Yet Kenya has soda ash. We have sand from Isinya that is used for making glass. So what we need from Europe is a small proportion of that material that is used for capturing the light. But we can do the glass, we can do the panel. Where we being promised equipment to be transported from Europe to Africa to help us adapt. We should be producing. Those companies should actually be relocating to Africa, where we have resources. We have soda ash. Kenya produces 75% of soda ash in the world. Why isn't nobody telling us? Kenya's contribution to climate change is that soda ash from Lake Magadi will be used to make billions of solar panels that will be placed in Sahara Desert, and we can sell energy to Europe, which is just across the lake, the Mediterranean Ocean. We are not told that. We are told we will receive electric cars, all manufactured in Europe. We will get energy-saving bulbs. The vacuum inside the bulb is actually not even from Kenya. It's imported. I'm talking about the vacuum being imported. Yeah. So actually, there's nothing for you in terms of our production. Our youth won't get any jobs. Why are we talking about electric vehicles without talking about our resources from Dogokundu, Kwale County, where we produce niobium. Niobium is the material used for making wiring for electric vehicles. What do? We put it in a 10-ton truck, scoop it and take it to the ocean. send it to other countries. Why are we not trying to look at opportunities for us as Africa that we can influence and actually control the next economy, the green economy? Talk about the circular economy. What are you telling women groups? Who start groups that you can do table banking, be collecting plastic along the ocean, the shoreline. That's not where we should be. We should be talking about how Kenya produces glass for the whole, glass, for the whole world. Because we have sand, we have soda ash, and the other component is energy, which we are not getting enough of from local supply. Can we get energy that can be used for making glass, so that companies that are doing beverages don't do them in plastic, but instead do them on recyclable glass that have a low carbon footprint, and also will not persist in the environment to cause problems to other organisms. So it's actually our look. We went with the wrong concept. Using the marriage process. If you go to pay dowry, you can be given so many conditions, but none of those conditions tell you not to go home with your wife. It's something you optional.
You choose to go with your wife, or you conditions?
The condition about not going with the wife is not normally there. Nothing stops you, but you are normally advised, okay, tutahitaji pesa fulani, which was used for something.
See, for education, for water.
You may pay the following week, or in next 10 years, nothing happens to you. There's nothing binding the European country or the West, the developed West, even China or whatever, to pay us the 100 billion. Nothing. Even the new fund, there's nothing binding them to pay us. It's just like
they choose to or not.
It's optional.
It's optional.
If I feel like the economy is not doing well.
Does this then mean, is there then need to have these COPs, so to speak? Because if number one, we have no legal a framework binding these discussions and these promises and these commitments, then do we need to go back then to the drawing board and come up with these things fast? Because it's like building a house without a foundation, so to speak, from what I'm understanding from you, like building this house without foundation, because the legal framework should be not the foundation holding these COPs or these conference of parties, whereby now when someone commits to this and this and this, there's legal framework which can follow up with them if they don't do that. So do you think we need to go back to the drawing board again before we go to the upcoming COPs 28, 29 moving forward, before I come to Amos?
The unfortunate thing is that there is no guarantee that can guarantee an international guarantee. So you are cooked. There's nothing that can help you there. You can't, even if America promised you the 100 billion the next year, if they don't do that, where will you take them?
That's it. Yeah.
So, for that reason, we cannot depend on those promises. We should instead focus on our own action, whatever action that is yielding. If we in Africa we feel like planting a lot of mangroves, like we said, or bamboo, or madanga tree, the tree that grows in Garissa and has this year helped actually ameliorate the drought, make the drought not so severe in Garissa because there was still vegetation. We should concentrate on changing. It is not a scientific, there's not even an equipment that can be manufactured to help stop climate change. The best is planting trees. We should stop extraction of those fossil fuels, and then focus ourselves on, if you can do electric cars, Africa would do very well with electric cars. But governments depend, and just like the Middle East, they depend so much on oil. The same government depends so much on oil for taxation. So they are never ready to actually make very hard decisions that can lead to the elimination of
it's a good chase.
Yeah, the same story. your father-in-law is not the best person to be at the table when you are discussing the loss of dowry or banning of dowry.